All right. Well, welcome everyone. All those great technical difficulties. We always have a little bit of a fun thing starting off our webinars, and appreciate you all being here. In the beginning, I made Dorinda our host instead of me, so I wasn't seeing people logging in. So glad you were in there and waited for a minute or two to get in the webinar with us today. I'm Craig McAtee. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the National Coalition of Advanced Technology Centers. Many of you I've met or know along the way. Some of you I hope I do in the future. But today is our what we're calling part two, but a deeper dive into a webinar that we hosted a couple months ago on a very important and very on top of everybody's mind. What do we do with Gen Z and how do we get them more engaged in the multi-generational workplaces that we all are part of these days? And we're delighted to have Dorinda Byers and Cori DiBiase and Kimberly Harris with us today again. And they're going to take us onto a really nice deep dive into the mentorship aspects of Gen Z's needs in the workplace and some really great statistics as well as some best and promising practices that you all can take away. Now we are recording this for those that can't make it today, and it will be on our website within the next couple days for you to share with your colleagues if you'd like. But for lack of a better turning it over and not wasting any more time for me, I'd like to introduce Dorinda Byers. She has been a longtime friend and colleague of NCATC and is very closely associated in working with the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub, which is part of what we're doing here today and all the work they're doing. So Dorinda, I'm going to hand it over to you and take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. Delighted to have Kim and Cori with me and here today with the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub. And you'll see in the background my Christmas background, just so you know, it's kind of like my holiday in August type background, trying to stay a little bit cooler and thinking about all that good holiday food. So FYI, we are here today, as Craig said, to talk about engaging Gen Z and really how we incorporate youth into that multi-generational workplace through using some mentoring. So we already kind of did a little bit of our introductions. The Manhattan Strategy Group is actually responsible for and operates the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub. And in the chat, maybe you could tell us who some of you are with your name, role, and how you imagine Gen Z participating in your organization, and maybe what some of your challenges are in working with Gen Z. You'll see here on the slide, we've got several generations represented. As Craig mentioned earlier, this is now a multi-generational workplace. So what we're trying to think about is how do we get all of those generations working together better? And mentoring is one of those ways we can do that. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk a little about who we are at the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub. We're going to review some, as Craig said, essential data and statistics around Gen Z. We're going to talk a little about how we cultivate Gen Z leadership and investment. How do we support some of our existing employees to engage Gen Z? And then how do we evaluate our efforts and make sure that we are being successful with the programming and the efforts we are putting forth? A little about us at the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub. We are a Department of Labor registered apprenticeship intermediary. What does that mean to you? We are a one-stop solution for helping recruit talent into the supply chain automation workforce area. Our services are available to you at no cost, and we work with a variety of stakeholders, including education, workforce boards, and also directly with employers. We do a lot of outreach like we are doing today with this webinar. We also had some financial incentives and dollars available to support the scaling of registered apprenticeship programs or establishment of new programs. We support registration of programs in the registered apprenticeship space, and that's something that a lot of folks find pretty valuable because they feel like there's a lot of red tape and challenges getting through there. We also support the development of standards for programs, and we support modifying current registered apprenticeship programs. We offer some trainings like we're doing today, and then we identify some other federal and state funding opportunities that might be available to support registered apprenticeship programs. Some of our other services and supports, again, working directly with employers and helping connect them to education and training providers like many of you. Supporting some curriculum development. We have done that with some of our community colleges and helping them really put together that curriculum that's needed for a registered apprenticeship program. And also looking at helping connect workforce and education providers to some of those local employers. So now we're going to talk a little about who is Gen Z and some different data points around Gen Z. One of the first ones very relevant here to the work that you all do with NCATC and in your institutions, Gen Z is interested in the future of skilled trades. What are some of their concerns, however, about breaking into skilled trades? Well, one of those is the cost of school. Another is access to getting the right tools and equipment. And another that we see on there directly relevant to our topic today is that firsthand access to mentoring. So they are looking for that mentoring and that opportunity to be connected to someone who can help them grow in their career. Why they crave mentorship? I'm just going to look at a couple of points on here. And I think one of the ones that jumps out to me is that career growth and that skill development. They are really looking for those opportunities to advance in the workplace, and they see mentorship as a great way to do that. What they're seeking in a mentor, I draw your attention on here to that authenticity and that personalized guidance. They're really looking for real people, real experiences. They want to hear about successes and failures. And they also want guidance that is tailored directly to their unique needs as an individual. How companies and organizations like us can deliver that mentor training. I think that capacity building with some of those individuals that companies are selecting as mentors is really important. Reverse mentoring, just a quick example of that. I was talking with a company last week about how AI is going to impact their operations, and they do a lot of welding, 100% welding for various oil and gas applications and things like compressor stations. And they're going to get a new AI programmed welder. And one of the things that the gentleman shared with me that was going to change their business was they will now need more fitters to feed that welder. So right now it doesn't take as many fitters to fill the welder and make sure that the welder has enough work because an individual is running that. So they're going to have to redeploy people to fitters, and they see a real opportunity for reverse mentoring as they complete that transition, because some of their older, more veteran employees of other generations are a little scared of the new AI technology, whereas their younger workforce is saying, hey, this is a real opportunity. So what they want to do is have some of their younger workers really learn from those veteran workers and vice versa as they implement that technology. So that's a great example of how our younger workers in Gen Z can also be mentoring those veteran workers. Fostering that mentorship culture, I think we want to make sure we have that leadership buy-in and that continuous improvement through feedback and evaluation that Kim and Cori are going to talk about. Less access to mentoring. So just a couple of stats that jump out to us on here. 2 in 3 Gen Z adults say there were times they may have wanted a mentor but didn't have access to one. And then also that natural mentoring can remain more common in those higher income households than maybe in some of our lower income households. So how do we help those students make those connections? Meeting Gen Z where they are, we all know that this is a digital generation. Just looking at some of these statistics, they're securing jobs and internships through TikTok. So how do we help our employers make sure they are on there? They're also reaching out and connecting to mentoring on Instagram. So how do we make sure that some of our employees who might be mentors are also comfortable with that technology? Valuing that employee and keeping that employee on the job. 71% of employees with mentors see good or excellent advancement opportunities at their company. So in an era when we are struggling with employee motivation and morale, mentoring can really make that difference. We also see their mentee retention is 72% versus 49% for non-mentored employees. So again, we're talking about real bottom line results that mentoring can generate for us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my dear colleague, Cori DiBiase, who's going to talk a little more about mentoring and do a deep dive into how we create that Gen Z-driven workplace. Cori, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dorinda. I really appreciate that. And as we dive into this, before we even begin, I'm going to like the old vacuum cleaner salesman I actually am, which putting myself right out of Gen Z right now, but I'm gonna try and meet an objection before we even get to it. When we think about Gen Z, we're thinking about a generation that that I'm sure we hear, rather, even if this is not what we think, I'm sure we hear from our colleagues, from employees, from classmates, from others, that this is a somewhat more entitled generation. This is a generation that is coming in with expectations that perhaps we did not come in into the workplace with, into the workforce with. So if that's the case, why are we starting off right off the bat with, well, how are we, how can we do more for Gen Z? Why is that the focus versus trying to understand how we can engage Gen Z so that we're getting more as well? Well, so if we can jump right to the next slide. What I would like us to think about as a kind of rubric for the next few slides, the next chunk of this conversation, is that as we're doing this, of course, we want to begin by understanding. We want to understand Gen Z as well as we can from every possible angle. We want to start with those statistics that and those demographic ideas that Dorinda just introduced to us. And we want to go further than that, right? We want to set up mechanisms within our organizations, within our classrooms, within our agencies, within our programs to ensure that we are truly engaging folks in a way that helps us understand each individual better. Because, of course, statistics are fantastic and we all fit in there somewhere, but we all also know if you suddenly start describing us as purely statistics, well, that's never going to reflect who we are. That's never going to connect with who we think we are. So what are we doing to make sure that we have the mechanism in place to understand who these folks are? And then, yes, next step is we want to actually look at this expectation of coming in with a sense that I'm going to come in right away. I'm going to contribute who and what I am. I'm going to make my mark on this place right away. Well, we want to actually take that and use that, the impulse, right? We want to empower Gen Z in a way that is going to act like rocket fuel to the work that we're doing now, right? If folks are coming in saying, I expect a seat at the table, I expect a role in this, I expect a role in shaping the way we do our business, great. Have a seat. And then what comes after that, when we say, great, have a seat, you're empowered now, what comes next is that we've got to expect some things, right? We need expectations for folks, and we need to clarify those expectations. Because as I think we know, certainly when I think about the times in my life when I have been described as maybe being a little presumptuous, maybe having expectations of maybe coming and seeming like I was having a lot of expectations for how I should be treated. Probably what was going on with me at that point in time is I was feeling a little adrift, right? I wasn't certain what was happening around me. I was not feeling comfortable, and maybe I was overcompensating a little bit, trying to show how big and tough and cool I was, and how and trying to show my value in a way that. In retrospect, now I see, okay, it didn't translate as well as I hoped it would, but we see the impulse there is actually, at least in part, coming from a sense of uncertainty about what expectations are, and a sense of like, well, I maybe I want to be doing more, but I don't know how. I don't know under what circumstances. So we want our expectations of Gen Z to be a key piece of this equation as we see. So we can jump to the next slide, please, Dorinda. Beginning with our notion of understanding. I mean, right off the bat, and this is happening whether we like it or not. Let's say that. I mean, we understand the forward march of technology is not something that we can say, well, yes, we'd like to be a part of that, or no, we wouldn't. It's happening. There's no two ways around that. The question is, are we, again, using it like fuel? If that is momentum that we cannot stop, well, then let's jump on board, right? Let's get in the slipstream. Excuse my, I'm mixing about 17 different analogies there, but pick the one you like best and remember that one, and we'll run with that. So of course we want multiple media, many different ways for our communication between staff, communication between management and staff. We want many different ways that folks are being educated, folks are learning, folks are accessing new information to grow within their roles. And finally, and this is where our friend Dr. Harris is going to come in and talk at much greater length. We want to know, when we're talking about workplace and organizational satisfaction, when we're getting feedback on how well we're doing as an organization, as a team, as individuals, well, we want that too. We want to hear feedback in any way we possibly can. Then, of course, we want to ensure that there's a protocol to actually use that information, not just a mail slot with a, give us your comments and it goes down the little chute and it piles up there and we go back and we see that there are piles of great ideas that have just been sitting there because we never thought to put a protocol in place for how to actually use the information, right? We also want to ensure that decision makers not preference some media or modes over others, right? I think of the and I think we're a little bit past this stage here, but I think we can all remember that idea that, like, well, if you want to get in good with the boss, you better learn to play golf, because that's where the boss is in a great mood. That's where he'll really be listening to an idea. That's where you can really build a relationship with the boss. Don't worry about the conference room. Don't worry about the email. Just make sure. Well, we don't want that anymore, right? We want to make sure that however I want to feed information to you, however I want to feed insight, that there's a way for that to take effect, and that I'm not that in no way are we finding ways to kind of preference certain modes over others. And then finally, we're talking about this empowerment and talking about sort of building on this idea that Dorinda was introduced, this sort of what we might call non-hierarchical mentorship, or reverse mentorship, or reciprocal mentorship. Well, if you're listening to me say all this and you're thinking, well, just as I do, by the way, I'm not Captain Technology by any stretch of the imagination. So if I was running an organization and being told, well, you got to do this, all this new technology, I'd say, I don't know what to do. Well, I'll tell you what we can do is we can get the folks on our staff who do have this information, who do have this avidity with this and this connection to this kind of technology. Let's, they want more of a say. Well, great. Let's start with sort of finding ways to weave this into the way we do our business. And we can jump to the next slide, please, Dorinda. Another thing we hear, as we're talking about the discussions of statistics and demographics, that this Gen Z is a generation with just a heightened level of emotional involvement in the workplace. We might also describe it as that sort of line between the work-life balance that's kind of been deteriorating, right? That things are much, much, much more fluid. And of course, I think most of us can kind of track where we've seen our employers, and we've seen ourselves when we were employers trying to push the line in one direction, right? We've been trying to push it so that more and more and more of our employer stuff is seeping, more and more of that work is seeping into life. Well, now Gen Z is kind of in a very fluid way, sort of saying, well, all right, fine. If we're going to take down this barrier, let's make sure it's going in both ways. Let's make sure that when I'm at work, I don't feel as though my personhood, my emotional self no longer matters. So our managers, our instructors, our facilitators, our case managers, whatever, or whoever we have in charge of sort of engaging folks and understanding folks and working with folks, do they understand the whole person concept? Meaning, and I'm not going to go into these at length. We don't have time for that, but these are certainly things that we can find great information on. The whole person concept, simply the notion that I'm a lot more than Cori at work, right? There's all kinds of stuff that I bring to the workplace with me, because we don't go places in pieces. We are all always all of who we are. Wow, no, that didn't come out great. But you understand my point, right? We're all of us. We're all of that all the time. So what do we do in the workplace to recognize that, engage that, and again, use that like fuel? How do we get to talking about Cori's cats, or talking about Cori's love of kayaking, or talking about Cori's love of reading and history? How do we get that and weave that into this mix here so that is fueling Cori's work? How are we thinking about universal design for learning? Meaning we all learn in different ways and under different circumstances. How do we make sure that I get to learn in whatever way is best for me? And then that the information is there, and that the personal connections are there through that universal design lens as well. And then finally, are we aware of trauma-informed approaches? And this, of course, and I should say, none of these are somehow purely the province of Gen Z. This is all of us. This applies to all of us. These are things we can all benefit from. Thus, the term universal. But certainly, trauma-informed approaches. If I am in trauma, if I am in pain, if I am in crisis, then I'm not learning, I'm not engaging, I'm not working as well as I can. So what do we do to ensure that everyone feels not only welcome, but truly, safe and truly able to thrive in the environments, the classrooms, the conversations, the technological environments that we establish. And let's start to say, we for the longest time, how long have we talked about hard skills that that we can put a certification on and they matter and we can do this and we can think of like this is real work. We're rolling up our sleeves with our skills. And then there's this soft skill stuff. You got to be sure that you're getting along with people at the workplace, all that kind of stuff. Well, let's not make that hierarchical, shall we? Let's not say that there are these hard skills that really matter and these soft skills that you have to get by. Let's start valuing the notion that insight and innovation in engagement, in truly building stronger bonds in our classrooms, in our workplaces, in our management structures, in our teams. Let's say that someone's very good at doing that. We need to look at them and say, okay, they have some magic sauce here. We need to learn that. We need to value that, and we need to heighten the importance of that because we know that continually will come back to productivity, engagement, retention, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course. So and what are we doing here with this? How do we do some of these things? We're getting mentorship involved. We're having more informal and different kinds of events. We're giving folks the opportunity to connect in different ways. Finally, we're modeling authenticity in imperfection. Meaning that none of us are perfect, right? And we all have our faults. We all have our highs and our lows and our goods and our bads and our ups and our downs and and all the rest of it. So can we all just sort of admit that? And can we all just kind of put that out there? And if I'm the boss, if I'm in charge of the team, and if I'm bringing in some new staff person, can I do that as the imperfect person that I am, so that when I go to my employee, my teammate, my student, whoever else, and I sort of have to explore areas where they are not perfect. I'm not doing it looking down on them. I'm saying, hey, here we are, us two folk, neither of us perfect. Let's work together. Let me tell you some things. Let me help you understand some things that might heighten your effectiveness here. And let me hear that right back again. And let's understand that this conversation is going to keep going because we're going to keep trying to get better. We're going to keep walking up the stairs, but perfection is the ideal. We don't get there, right? We're never going to get there. And that's actually kind of a good thing. And being realistic about that. And that is something which, again, I think is valuable across the board, but we know that this is something that Gen Z values because the notion of kind of the perfect leader, the perfect boss, we kind of come to find that pretty preposterous, right? And Gen Z certainly is not going to buy that line from us by any means. And we can jump to the next slide if we could, Dorinda. Now, thinking about this notion of empowerment kind of goes right along these same lines. Of course, we see Gen Z having an expectation of sort of control and investment in the workplace, wanting to be valued for the insight that they're bringing. Maybe they're not thinking about that in the same ways that we have traditionally, right? Maybe when Gen Z is thinking about their ambition and their desire to have a role in the workplace, they're not thinking about, well, how do I work my way up the hierarchy? How do I get to be this level, then this level, then this level? Maybe we're thinking about these in ways that have to adjust, that are going to force us to adjust how we manage teams, how we manage classrooms, how we manage an organization, so that we stop thinking so much about hierarchy, so that we stop thinking so much about authority and leadership, and we start thinking more about genuine leadership. What, in this case, what do we need here? What is going to take us the next step forward, and who can provide that leadership? Is that leadership in this case, on this team, on this project, ideally going to come from Cori, who, by the way, is not Gen Z, or is it, no, we need a technology solution. We need a solution that is reflective of a totally different perspective. And that leadership is going to come from Gen Z. But the first step in my mind is getting away from the notion of hierarchy and starting thinking about just where does leadership come from? It's the wind in our sails. That's all it is. Let's take it wherever we can find it and put it to use. And we can jump right to the next slide and keep talking about, again, that notion of getting away from a hierarchy. So when we think about a team, when we think about what we're all kind of working on here together, let's start with, what are the goals? What are the requirements? What are we trying to accomplish? Where is the finish line? And then how do we get there? Who can help with that? Is it the big boss? Is it the new employee? Is it whoever? It doesn't matter. Let's understand ourselves, our people, and our teams well enough. We're going to the folks who are going to best meet the needs of what's going on. Um, how can we get new perspectives on a task? How can we build new connections between staff? How can we take more advantage of staff knowledge and expertise? How can we create new leadership opportunities, not by stinking up the hierarchies, but by saying, we don't really care what your job title is. Here's an opportunity to thrive. Here's an opportunity to grow. Here's an opportunity to put your stamp on the fabric of this organization, this classroom, this team that we have here. And again, we can jump forward, please, Dorinda. And this is what brings us to expectation, right? Our role in clarifying what we want, what we need, and what we ask of Gen Z. So much of this notion of entitlement is wrapped up with the idea that we kind of have this back of our minds thought that, well, Gen Z is expecting a lot, but not necessarily expecting that we will expect a lot in return. Well, we're going to expect that, and in the right ways, and in the right teams, and with the right opportunities, we see those expectations absolutely being met. But a couple of things that we want to do here, right? And I think we can certainly think of, most of us can look at our employment histories and see examples of when we were not doing this well, or when others were not doing this well for us. We want expectations for performance and behavior and outcomes to be very clearly stated in every case. We're going to kind of try and move past this. Oh, well, kiddo, you got to learn the ropes. Oh, boy, yeah, when you first come on here, you got to just figure things out for yourself and fight the... Okay, that's all well and good. And there's still going to be that, because we're never going to clarify everything. We're never going to make everything absolutely precise. But we're not sort of doing this expectation that, hey, just drink from the fire hose for a while and you'll figure it out eventually. You'll get to know the ropes. No, we want to show folks, we want to tell folks what we expect from them, how they're going to make this progress. Of course, it's also going to be rational. We want expectations that are based on demonstrable needs of the team and the organization. We're expecting this from you because this is the goal, this is the finish line we're trying to get to, and this is how you're going to help us get there. Plain and simple. It's not abstract. It's not, well, this is the way we've always done it. It's what is practically needed here. And of course, it's collaboratively developed, right? And when I say collaboratively developed, this is where, again, we want Gen Z involved in that collaboration as well. Again, let's be clear there. Collaboration, not let's hand it over to Gen Z and have them figure this all out for us. No, let's all get together. Let's all work on these things together. And we can jump to the next slide, if we could, please, Dorinda. Again, as we think about the way we cultivate these expectations, we begin by taking nothing for granted. It's not about the way we've always done it. It's not about, it says this in the job description. It says this and this. Now, we want to think as flexibly as we possibly can about different ways to express value, different ways to essentially to engage and extract value from our employees, and to ensure that they're delivering that value that they want to deliver. So do we ask, why do we have this rule, this guideline, this way we've assigned teams, this way we've thought about project management? Why is it there? What was the intent? And does the intent get us toward the outcome or not? Sometimes, yes, it will be there, and demonstrating that will be very helpful. Other times we'll see that, like, okay, this is the way we've always done it, but maybe that is not the way things need to work anymore. And finally, does any given rule or expectation impact some employees differently than it does others? Is it going to appear as something that, like, well, that rule is great for Cori, but maybe it's not so great for Dorinda, maybe it's not so great for Kim? And of course, we need to understand that, and once again, collaboratively be thinking about how we manage and develop these things. And we can keep right on going, please, Dorinda. So keeping this going as we think about this, the entire staff, if we're talking about engagement, right, we're not just talking about Gen Z, now we're talking about everyone. So how do we then turn around and say to the rest of our staff that this is not an obligation? This is not, all right, everybody get ready, we've got to welcome Gen Z, so everybody else has got to change because we've got to roll out the red carpet. No, let's talk about how we can benefit for everyone through this process. So if we can jump to the next slide, please. So of course, this is a challenge, right? I don't want to make this sound simple at all, but whenever we're coming in and saying, okay, we want to make changes so that we can ensure that we're being open and we're welcoming as many different kinds of staff as possible, that always runs the risk of making folks who are already there feel like we're saying, all right, you know what, Kim, we're going to have to welcome Dorinda onto the team, so you're going to have to make some compromises so that Dorinda's going to feel okay about this, right? We want to make sure that this is an entirely reciprocal operation. But as you'll notice, a lot of the things that we've talked about, I hope, at least for me, when I make those descriptions, all that sounds pretty good to me, as long as it's not just directed at one group. So if we can jump to the next slide, please, and again, continue to think about how we make this as universal as possible. Of course, we want to be appreciating our existing staff. We want to recognize earned status, time spent, innovation committed, work done. All that matters. We're not saying, oh, it doesn't matter that you've worked here for 20 years, Cori. We've got new folks coming in. No, of course, we are continuing to emphasize the importance of the earned status that folks have. We're looking at mentorship again as not as a hierarchical thing, but as an opportunity for everyone. If I'm mentoring Kim, that is not because, well, I've got all this insight and Kim needs to learn from it. No, it's I'm mentoring Kim so that we can be learning from each other, and that's what this is. We can even get beyond thinking mentor-mentee, and we think of a sort of peer supportive relationship that allows us to ensure that all these things are empowering across the board. Ensure that, and just let's think about the way we talk about these things. All that stuff I talked about that was going to welcome and engage Gen Z, that we see as best practices that can bring this generation in. None of those things should be harmful to anyone else in the workplace. They should be helpful to everyone in the workplace, and we need to make sure we're communicating it that way so that comes through. We can jump to the next slide, please, Dorinda. And then again, we're supporting all staff here. So if I'm saying we want to make sure Gen Z has a voice in planning, I'm not saying Gen Z has the voice in planning. We're doing this as a team. We're connecting everyone as best we can. We're realigning team structures, not to accommodate Gen Z, to accommodate talent, to accommodate interest, to accommodate engagement of all staff. These flexible approaches to our highly structured aspects of workplace, classroom, what have you, all of that, we're looking to benefit and preference everyone, not just one particular generation. And of course, the way we look at a work-life balance, the way we look at empowerment, the way we look at engagement, this should be benefiting everyone. Part of that is ensuring that that's the case. Part of all this is communicating that that is the case and that is the expectation. And with that, I believe we'll jump to the next slide. And I will have the pleasure of saying that I'm going to hand it off to my friend and colleague, since we are all good friends and colleagues here, the wonderful Dr. Kimberly Harris.
Thank you so much, Cori. I tell you, every time we have one of these webinars and just engaging just overall, it is definitely one of these things where there's always something to learn from what Cori brings to these conversations. And I think that the thing that I value so much about what we have been discussing thus far, what Dorinda started us off with, and then what Cori so eloquently picked up and took us thus far with, is the fact that it really sets us up to think about, why are these things important? Of course, the case has already been made. Cori's talked about that. Dorinda's given us great stats. But it's also great to also keep in mind that we're really thinking that ultimately at the end of the day, not an ugly word, we're thinking about productivity. We're thinking about profitability. We're thinking about going concern, right? And when we think about all of those things that inform what it is to make good decisions that enable those things to happen, good decision making is at the core of that. And the drivers of good decision making is basically an environment that's conducive for honesty, for vulnerability, for all those things that Cori talked about. Everything won't be rosy as we make the sausage, right? But the honesty to really be candid about things that we don't understand, things that we've observed along the way that might be problematic and can slow down, progress and process to, advancement in terms of thinking about the organization, are things that we need to be mindful of. So as we think about this part of the process and this part of the conversation, program design and evaluation, and specifically the data collection component component of it. We really want to always keep in mind that our ultimate goal, and Cori talked about this so beautifully just a few slides ago, is that we're thinking about alignment. There are the things that we say that we're about and that we want to achieve per the mission, per the strategic plan, per all the things that we have invested a lot of human capital and fiscal capital and all the things. And then there are the actual outcomes that arise and that are yielded from what we actually do. And thinking of the evaluation and your external evaluation partner, and with some help from your external evaluation partner, a good internal evaluation team, thinking of that component, it's really like, the good breadcrumbs, to make sure that we don't go astray, that as we think about all of the things that are guiding our why, that a good evaluation plan and executing that enables us to stay on that path. And could we advance to the next slide? Thank you so much, Dorinda. And so thinking about, the design and the evaluation, we always keep coming back to this basically kind of like our constant drumbeat around program evaluation must reflect the program design itself. We don't want, to be working in a silo, having all of this great thoughtfulness and a team coming together to, think about, what do we need, as we want to be, helpful and responsive to our Gen Zers and all of our, as Cori said, this wonderful picture that he painted around the existing staff and all staff, earned status, new opportunity. How do we reflect the planning? How are we mindful of all those things? Well, to do that, we first have to also be mindful of the fact that as we think about how do we evaluate, assess the value, assess the fidelity of the implementation of that fancy way, basically making sure that things are properly aligned the way that we intended. We have to make sure that we are doing that alongside, the folks who are designing the programs, the mentoring programs, the apprenticeship programs, all of the things that are going to ensure that the workforce and the organizational team is as productive as possible. So once again, just that constant drumbeat of starting with the end in mind, right? Those are those outcomes that we talked about. What is it that we're really looking for, our 5-year, our 10-year, whatever the timetable may be, and then reverse engineering, working our way back. All right, if this is where we're working toward, what do we need to do to ensure that we are, going to get to that endpoint or to that particular point or that place, if you will, based upon the processes that we're pulling together. Could we advance to the next slide? Thank you so much. And in response to that, that is going to be the role of good data collection, right? The purpose of good data collection is going to ensure that we're gathering the evidence for to really measure and assess effectiveness or impact, or in some cases, both, right? We want to measure, what have been the gains made? How many, new recruits or new apprentices, how many apprentices have gone from apprentice to journeyman, from journeyman to skilled established tradesperson? How has productivity been impacted? What type of self-report information are we getting? So we want to make sure that whatever the things are that we care about, that are going to be those breadcrumbs, that data, that we have a process in place that's making sure that we're getting the data that matters, the data that we need for the measurement, for the assessment, for the analysis that we're doing. So we want to make sure that our data is able to properly measure. And from that measurement, then to be able to properly inform. We want to take all of that rich data that we collect. We want to be able to have some questions that we're looking to answer, and that's our measurement. And then based on those answers, do we proceed, at the same rate? Do we need to, slow it down? Do we need to speed it up? Do we need to course correct? Do we need to augment in some way any particular aspect of the plan to maybe bring on additional support, or whatever the recommendations and the findings and the revelations that the data, will provide. I love to call them the gems, right? Because they are giving us valuable information around, what's next, what have we found, what are the learnings from that. And then, as I just said before, thinking about improvement, that all of these things that I'm talking about, all of these things that we've been discussing collectively, is that collective responsiveness to organizational needs, being reflective of goals, right? We're thinking about what it is we mapped out, and we're thinking about the questions, and we've crafted questions based upon the outcomes that we care about and that we've agreed, right? And going back to that word that Cori kept, bringing up, collaboration, collaborative. These things don't happen in silos, right? So thinking of those things, then how do we then utilize that to, do all those things that we talked about? Do we need to modulate in some way? Are we right on track? And then how do we maintain to ensure that we get to where we're trying to go? Could we advance to the next slide? So as we think about, you say, okay, well, all of that is great. Well, where is this amazing data going to come from? And as Cori talked about, it's right there at our fingertips, right? It's going to come from the people who are on our teams. It's going to come from, the folks who have had that seat at the table for a while, the incumbent talent that we've had that maybe have worked their way up through the ranks. That's a wealth of institutional data that we don't want to dismiss as we also bring on new talent, new wisdom, as Cori talked about, and I love that Dorinda talked about as well, this reverse mentorship, right? Where it's not just all of this font of knowledge coming from on high and just leaking its way down. It's really a circular thing, right? It's, a lot of institutional, knowledge from veteran incumbent talent that's been working at our organization for a while, coupled with, all of this insight that some of our, novices bring in, our new recruits bring in, our Gen Zers, other folks who maybe we have not had a lot of their representation in our workspaces before, what they're bringing in around technology, around markets, around what people want to care about, around new technology and new ways of doing things that can really kind of catapult in a positive way what we do in the work that we do. So, it could be onboarding interviews, performance appraisals, climate surveys, and exit interviews. There's data, there's good richness that can come at either end of the spectrum of someone's life course within an organization. And we want to make sure that we are aware of that and responsive to that. So as we're thinking about planning, as we're thinking about crafting questions, we are crafting questions that make sense for the where and the what that we're doing within the organization. Could we go to the next slide, please? So just to give you an example of what we're talking about, thinking about some work that that I did with a client a couple of years back around the space of virtual mainframe and mainframe programming, right? As Dorinda and Cori talked about, there, that is a sector, that's a place in space in terms of the economic sector that is a very high rewarding, high paying space sector that was basically populated with a lot of folks who had been in that space for 30 plus years or more. And they wanted to, move on to other things. They had contributed to the sector. Mainframes are often the backbone of commerce. They are the engines that run, a lot of these point of sale operations across our, world, not just our country. And what does it mean to bring in a generation of workers, a generation of virtual programmers who did not who were not seasoned in the same generational epoch, if you will, as those who are kind of, sunsetting out. So one thing to think about, in terms of an example, right? And thinking about the richness of data and how do we collect data, a question around, there's a mentorship initiative designed to increase retention rates among Gen Zers in mainframe programming. Does that initiative result in increased engagement? Does it result in authentic integrational team dynamics and overall increased productivity? That's a really that's a layer, that's a really dense question, right? That sounds really wonderful, but there are lots of things that if, as the evaluator, coming in, as an external partner, that I may want some clarification on that, as an organizational team member, you may just take for granted because you're in the mix all of the time. But it's great when we're thinking about what are our ultimate goals to unpack the verbiage to really kind of come up from the pool, or I'm not that great with metaphors, Cori, so you'll have to kind of bear with me, but really just to take a couple of steps back to say, okay, this is what we said. It's still pretty relevant, but what does it mean and how would we know if we've gotten there? And that's one of the roles that a good evaluator does in this process is to say, let's take a question like this and let's just unpack it. What does that mean? How will we know if we have, well, retention, probably not so hard, to measure. Are we keeping folks? Are folks not, or do we have fewer folks attriting out or leaking out? Are we keeping more folks? But then when we think about engagement and intergenerational engagement, what type of productivity are we talking about? Just dollars and cents? Does it mean that, the widgets that we're crafting, we're getting those done in half the time? How do we define these things? And when will we know that we've gotten there? What type of mile markers do we need to establish to measure our progress along the way? And so as we think about the question, that then helps us to think about where will we go within the organization to get that data? Will that be pulled from, shop floor reports? Will it be things that we would get in annual evaluations of, team members? Will it be some other form of data that is just part and parcel of the data that we collect as an artifact of the business that we do? Or do we need to introduce a new data collection mechanism to help us to get to the answers to those questions? But whichever approach is necessary or makes sense, the questions that we craft have to be in service to the objectives and the outcomes, and then the data collection has to be in service to all of that. So what seems like it can be a layered or gnarly process, when we take a little time to unpack it, when we take a little time to tease it out, what we do find is that what we have really is something that really we have some breadcrumbs that can enable us to get to where we're trying to go along the way. Could we advance to the next slide? And just finally, with this final example, thinking about program design and evaluation and the role of data collection, thinking about mentors trained on trauma-informed approaches to avoid re-traumatization or cultivating personal control and agency. And then thinking about, what questions do we need to be thinking about from an evaluation standpoint to help us to know, are we achieving that goal? Is the outcome or the objective of making sure that we avoid re-traumatization, or that we are cultivating that agency, or we are making sure that there is increased resiliency and coping methods, that those things are happening. We need to make sure that we've thought through strategically questions like, are all team members given regular opportunities to express challenges and needs in their relation to trauma and their perceptions of belonging and comfort? How would we collect data on that? Would that be something that we could get from regularly scheduled surveys, anonymous or de-identified surveys of team members? Or would that be something that would be more appropriate in some other form of data collection that may be part and parcel of our organizational operation? But whichever approach makes sense, because also too, all of these approaches are highly contextual. We do the thing that makes sense for the places and spaces that we're in and for the team that we have. And so when we think about that, as a key component of how do we ensure that the data that we're collecting is going to serve the goals that we're trying to meet, and that those goals and all of the things that we've crafted have really been a collaborative process, right? And not just this thing that's happened in a silo. I think if you've sat in or been part of any of the conversations that we've had in some of the other webinar series that we've done, you'll know that we're always harping on the fact that collaboration, communication, consultation are paramount, right? Because as we're thinking about all of these things, they really work together and fit together like a dovetail. I love furniture. As I think about, a good craftsman and the dovetails, right, that really kind of, are so sturdy and strong. When we think about from a systems approach, how these things are done to sustain an organization, we have to think about all of the folks who make up the teams that are part of that organization. And that is the role of good data collection. And with that, we will say thank you and open it up to questions.
Hey, I'm going to start if you don't mind, and then I want the attendees to please chime in and turn your cameras on if you'd like. But I can't help but think of 3 or 4 things that just evolved from my history of work in manufacturing and education and all the things that we've done at NCATC. And that is the culture of the company, no matter what size, has got a lot to do with what can be done in these kind of mentorships and I can't help but think about emotional intelligence training and being self-aware and being able to have that empathy and social skills as the cross collaborative that sense of belonging in that last slide is 100% a feeling that people must have so they can feel good about being mentored, I would think, and in fact I know, right? And then I look at, are there personality tests that companies may be doing, like the DISC approach, or things like the Myers-Briggs, that help people understand their strengths in mentorships and leadership positions and team-oriented things. And last but not least, and I'll just stop here, is that I can't help but think about the best model I've come across in the decades about empowerment is that Ritz-Carlton customer service model across the whole organization. And I think some people call it the $2,000 rule. If somebody as a janitor on the floor can help a customer with a conference room need of a projector, and it doesn't cost more than a couple $1,000s to the Ritz-Carlton, they feel that it's worth that person not wasting the customer's time to just go help them immediately without going through all the other hierarchical approaches to possibly helping that customer that would take a lot more time. So those things came to my mind, and I'd love to throw it open to the attendees for questions. But any comments you have on those topics, I'd love to hear that too.
I will just say I've seen a lot more interest recently, Craig, to your point, from companies in that self-awareness piece and the DISC and that sort of thing,
Okay,
because I think that there is this sense that people don't necessarily know themselves, or that maybe they have changed a great deal as a result of COVID, some of that. So I've
sure.
definitely seen a lot more sense of that self-awareness and understanding each other to be able to better work together, and interest in how does that then translate to some of the relationships that I have, whether that's with my boss, whether that's with a client, whether that is with my mentor, or whether if I'm a mentee. So I definitely agree with you that that self-awareness trend is definitely out there, and there's much more emphasis on how do I understand myself and how do I understand others, and then create those better relationships, and how does that coaching kind of fit into that, and some of those pieces of mentoring, and maybe looking at that result of that personality assessment, if you will, to say, well, gosh, Dorinda isn't that patient of a person. Let's just say, for example, she might not be the best mentor. So really looking at that data to try to figure out if Dorinda is still going to be a mentor, then how are we going to shore up that weakness, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes really good sense. I know
I
we're
mean,
up.
I would.
Go ahead, Corey.
No, I was just gonna say I would add just underline, not even really add to, but underline something that both you, Craig, and Dorinda said. I think about Myers-Briggs, and I look back as pretty much as far as I can go in my career, and there have been we would do the one or two special days. We're going to do a staff retreat, or we're going to do a big planning meeting, whatever it was, and we're going to do something like a Myers-Briggs. And well, now we'll understand that Corey's like this, and Dorinda's like that, and Kim's like this. And then we get to the end of that day, and we'd have all this understanding. It would be so cool. And then the next day we would be right back to the same old thing. So when we think about that Ritz-Carlton model, that's how we go from a neat idea to an institutional approach, to an approach that is modeled, institutionalized, rewarded, incentivized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that this is not a kind of set aside thing where, yeah, on one special day of the year, we think about whether Cori's an introvert or an extrovert or whatever else, and we think about how he can be more effective and more engaged as a consequence of that, and then we move along. How do we do that every day? And I mean, I think it's a mixture of doing, like looking at how do we do our work as the Ritz-Carlton did in a way that reflects that all the time, not just some of the time, not just, incidentally when it comes up. And it really is a responsibility of leadership, and underlining again, whatever leadership happens to me, not the big boss necessarily, but that leadership will constantly be modeling the value of those things and saying, and almost whichever of these approaches we take, however we base it, that we're valuing it, modeling it, and implementing it on an institutional basis.
Yeah, spot on. It becomes the standard culture. So I love that. Any questions from the? I know we only have a few folks left on the call. Anything from them before we end the webinar today? I know Jenny quite well from NTMA, but I don't want to put her on the spot. So I'm glad she's here with us today. I love, Dorinda, your AI and welding example. I think in the future, in this continuous need to make people aware of mentorships and coaching in this multi-generational environment that we all live in, that would be another great example to find some skilled trades that are really using AI and the approach to mentorship as well, both in reverse and from the top, the older folks to the younger folks and vice versa. I think that reciprocal mentoring is a great next thing that we should explore more. But I'm just really into this because it's the human side of everything we do, and that's what makes us different, And when we recognize and try to capitalize on best practices and promising practices to integrate with technology, the human spirit, whatever age bracket we're in. So with that, I want to thank you, Dorinda and Kimberly and Cori, again for being such professionals and providing so much wealth of knowledge and data to back it up and processes to go with it. I would ask if you can share your slide deck, your PDF version of it. We will then put that on the website if it's available, along with the video recording of this for others that couldn't make it today. But any final comments from you all?
I'll just say super quickly. I'm sorry, Dorinda.
You go right ahead, Kim.
No, just to say super quickly, I love this conversation. And just to say, as we're thinking about mapping personalities, I always love to tell clients and just tell folks, thinking about the organizational personality. And Craig, I think you so beautifully lifted that up, that we have to think about what is basically the synergy that's created when the organization is basically kind of converged with the folks in it. So just wanted to lift that up.
Agreed. All right, Dorinda, why don't you close us out, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the near future, hopefully in person.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Cori. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. We really appreciate your attentiveness and the great opportunity to discuss more about mentoring. If you have any questions, reach out to Craig, reach out to any of us. Our contact information is in the deck. And Craig, we will be sure to get that over to you. We really appreciate our partnership with you at NCATC and all of the great work that you do as well.
Very much reciprocal on that. And hopefully we can do one of these sessions in person in the near future as well. We look forward to that. Give it some thought. I will just end by saying it's amazing what we can all accomplish when nobody cares who gets the credit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
All right.
Bye for now.